Latch the windows, lock the doors, and put the kids to bed. It's time for another episode of
Tales from the Garage.
Okay, I'm probably crazy for attempting to do this again. Computer has been acting up, making it impossible for me to make these videos in the garage. The alternate is, I guess I can do them in my bedroom, but, the time is coming soon where it's going to be too cold to be out here anyway to make the videos. And I prefer to do them out here. In general, I like this space better anyway. But also, I'm set up for Halloween here, and it's Halloween, my favorite time of the year. So, I've got the Halloween lights back there, and just, the Halloween vibe is here. I even did my live improv music piece out here, which meant I had to actually drag my equipment out from the main part of the house. I didn't have the guitar and the pedals out here, and I'm just like, you know what? When I'm improvising, and trying to catch a mood, especially late at night, even though it's cold in here, there's no heat in here, and the weather is finally the way it should be in autumn. Sure, I could have recorded that improv piece that I put up a few days ago in my main living space or my bedroom or whatever, but strangely enough on this computer, the audio works fine, but the video has not been cooperating. And what I've been often getting is basically like a freeze frame thing where you get one frame every, 7, 10 seconds or 12 seconds or so, and then the next one. So you never know what you're going to get. So that's been acting up, making it impossible for me to do my normal videos. So every day, just about, I'm coming out here, turning on the computer, turning on the video camcorder program thing and seeing if it's acting up again. Today I finally came out just a little while ago and did a couple, test things, just a couple minutes long, and they seem to come out okay. So I'm going to be very brave and hopefully not get frustrated, because these are long videos for them not to come out. And I'm going to try to get through the part 2 of my promised Halloween special out here, and hopefully it will record the motion part of it as well. It's weird that the audio comes out fine, which is great, because weather permitting, and it's weird because last Thursday I was still sweating and it was muggy as hell here in Jersey. Now it's only Tuesday, it's not even a week later, and for the last 3 days it's been really cold. Here in the garage there's no heat, no AC. It's usually okay without the air conditioning because I'm on the ground floor. The heat is a different story. I can actually feel the breeze from the door, which may look like it's back quite a ways, isn't as far back as it looks, and it's not sealed very well, and you could actually feel cold air creeping in here. So what I thought I would do, even though I showed a lot of the, and probably most of the folks that would sit and watch this video probably were with me last year when I did, as I do annually, my Halloween video showing my stuff that I pull out and listen to or read or whatever during the season. So a lot of this, if not all of it, is just about the same with maybe some modifications. And but I like pulling it out and showing it because this is the stuff that I'm listening to. I'm going to try to remember in my comments section and my description section to include a couple links as well to some folders I created, because some of this stuff I've loaded out. I have a bunch of Halloween-oriented audio books on CD, stories, which I'm going to show, and a whole bunch of them I've loaded out onto my page over a year ago. And I have or will create a folder for them. I have to go back and check. And I will link that folder so you can actually get to hear some of the stuff that I'm talking about. I have a few books. I'm going to show a few books because these are books that get pulled out every year, and well, the first one I just look at because it's not a book to read. It's actually just about, I think it's the only recipe book I actually own. But it's actually Halloween recipes. And a few years ago, just before I moved in here, I I got into a mode of cooking Halloween treats that I don't actually eat. Listen, I've got enough of a weight problem as it is, but I don't eat in general like sweets and cookies and ice cream and things like that and cakes. But I got into a period of time going back maybe 6 or 7 years ago where I enjoyed making some recipes, some treat recipes, Halloween stuff, really, primarily. And I bought this book, and every year I pull it out and I look at it nonetheless. And I don't know if I probably won't get to make them this year. Who knows? I might. There's a lot of recipes in here, and the nice thing about them is most of them are extremely simple. So somebody who doesn't really cook like me can still make them. The thing that I like about this is there's some decorations that you can make. It's not just Halloween treats. There's how to make some simple decorations for your house, like these floating ghost things that are very cool. And I could see myself making those. Pretty simple stuff. I love this book. Like I said, I think I might have another Halloween recipe book, but I don't have a lot. And I keep these all together, even though they're totally unrelated with stories and books that you read. I like to keep that one around. It's one of those things that makes me happy when I see it. And between the recipes and the little home things like those floating ghosts that someday I will make, it's just one of those things I like. It's the only real holiday that I really like to celebrate. Now I have some books as well, and I'm only going to show a couple because these were the ones that were readily available for me to pull down. But every year at about this time, I pull out my Alfred Hitchcock Tales of Terror. You can see it's a real thick book that I got at a bargain price. It was a clearance thing at like a Barnes & Noble, I think it was. So for $10 you get this nice hardcover. A lot of stories, a lot of short stories. No monsters or anything. It's mystery stories. And really these are old reprinted stories from the Alfred Hitchcock mystery magazine, which is still being printed today, but back especially in the late 50s and early 60s, it was actually a very popular monthly magazine that kind of tied in a little bit with the show. Some of the short stories that were printed by a lot of the same authors appeared time after time in these mystery stories from the mystery magazine, and it was quite a popular magazine. Now I don't think it's printed every month. I think it might be printed every other month now, but surprisingly and incredibly the magazine still exists. They made a whole series, and at one point I had almost all of them. After these stories would appear in the mystery magazine, there came out a whole series of fairly inexpensive paperback books that reprinted a lot of these stories. And the paperback books, I want to say, probably came out in the mid to late 60s initially. But I bought them in the early 80s when they got reprinted. So those same paperbacks got reprinted multiple times. Some of them might even be on their third printing. And now a lot of those consist of mainly older stories written in the late 50s and early 60s. So it's a very different time than now, and it's interesting to read them now because before you start every story, I would always have to go to the reference page to find out when they were written, so you kind of understand the context of the story of what was going on. There certainly were no cell phones, and a lot of these stories written in the late 50s, early 60s, a lot of people that didn't have, a lot of money didn't even have televisions in the house. So in a way, it helps to know the context of the time that these stories were written in, even though the little mystery stories themselves don't contain a lot of references to that time period. You might think, well, gee, why didn't they call somebody? Well, there was no kind of phone for them to call somebody on, or even pay phones weren't around all that much, maybe like in the late 50s. So, and a lot of these stories, I don't know how the hardcover. I like the fact that a hardcover is going to last a lot longer. If I take care of it, this will outlast me actually. But they redid in the early 80s these paperback reprints of stories that were actually originally reprinted from the Alfred Hitchcock mystery magazine. And God, I must have had at least like 20 books of these. And I didn't bring them with me, 20 of these paperbacks. I didn't bring them with me when I moved. And they kind of go in and out of print. I bet you there's a whole bunch of them that are in print now, though. And I'm looking at this one, and I'm not 100% sure when these stories are from. I'm looking quickly for copyright dates. This book was actually compiled in 1986, so it's not an ultra new book. But these stories by Robert Bloch, I wouldn't think, with Robert Bloch that they would be very current. They would probably be from the 60s. August Derleth, who wrote a lot in the late 50s and early 60s. So these are probably a lot of stories from the 1960s in here, I would guess, judging by the names of people who wrote in here and what I know of them. And eventually some of these stories, sometimes they actually appeared in the Mystery Magazine first and actually were later adapted as stories. This is in the early days, obviously, of the magazine. Later adapted for stories in some cases for the actual TV show Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which goes to show how old they are, some of these stories. But I like that hardcover. I don't know how many of the Alfred Hitchcock short story books there are that have come out anymore in hardcover, because I don't know to what extent the audience exists for them anymore. It's mostly for people my age and older than me that grew up on the TV series. Now, when I was watching the TV series, it had long since ceased, and I was watching old reruns like people might watch old reruns of, whatever today. Another one, this is a really cool one, Harvest Tales and Midnight Reveals, which last I looked was out of print. I talked quite a bit, I think, last year about the origin of this book. I don't know how I stumbled across it, but this is another short story books from various authors. None of them are well known because the history of this comes from a guy who was always very much into Halloween, but when he got into his college years, he realized there wasn't a lot of Halloween stuff around for adults, people that were, over the age of children. And he kind of got together an idea in his college years that I believe continued for many years, if it's not still going today. And he gathered together a bunch of his friends for a kind of adult Halloween party, and everybody brought recipes, brought something to eat with them. But in order for them to come, they also had to come with an original story. So they had to write a story as short as they wanted that had some kind of tie-in to Halloween, and it had to be original. Could be funny, could be gory, whatever. And they would have to tell these stories at this party, at this Halloween get-together. And, the first year was such a success, it led into another year, and it became an annual tradition. And with all these people coming and bringing their various recipes and original stories. And after a number of years, I guess it was compiled initially by the guy who started the party. He decided to publish a book, and each story starts with a little simple black and white cartoon drawing like that. He would take the best stories that he had heard over the years from his friends and compile them in a book, and that's what he did here. And I don't know how I came across it, but I'm glad I did. And I believe this is out of print now, and it's a shame that it wasn't popular enough to spawn a series, because obviously having many people come over with original stories over the years, and having many years of these parties with these stories, there easily could have been further volumes of this. Hopefully maybe one day there will be. But it's just real interesting kind of backdrop to the stories in here. None of them, like I said, are by well-known people, but they all have a Halloween theme to them. And it's a wonderful book. So now we get into things that I other CDs then. Besides, I showed, in part one, I showed a lot of music that's associated with the holidays, a lot of quote-unquote Halloween CDs, and a lot of those CDs are actually various classical music pieces that were adapted later on for horror movies and kind of ended up becoming associated with horror movies, even if that wasn't their original intent. And I have some silly, I'm such a collector of this stuff that I'll buy anything that I think is slightly interesting. So I get some silly ones, like primarily meant more for kids maybe. The old Grey Goose tells some ghost stories, while sitting around a campfire thing. And Around the Fire with Uncle Guts, which is another one. I showed this one a couple years ago. And one of the people I watched my video actually came across a copy of this and got it. These two aren't all that serious. But they do, still, even on this Uncle Guts thing, they come out with, they do a version of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and the story of Count Dracula and that famous story, The Monkey's Paw. So they do their own version of that, kind of. So it rubs against being almost a serious thing. And back in the record store days, I probably got this, this is from the late 90s, I think, 1994, there was this, Halloween display in the record store. It doesn't exist anymore, Halloween's Greatest Stories. So those are actually stories, and a lot of Edgar Allan Poe stories told, Premature Burial, the Pendulum, The Telltale Heart, and at the end there's a little batch of scary sounds and spooky sounds. Now there's a ton of CDs of spooky sounds. I tend not to buy those because those are just sound effects mainly meant to accompany like a Halloween display for trick-or-treaters and that kind of thing. And how often are you going to sit there listening to somebody screaming or something? But even a couple years later, the same record company that put out the previous one I showed reissued it as Tales from Beyond, but it's the same CD. And this came out in 97, so that was only, 2 or 3 years later. I guess they discontinued the first one and came out with it sticking the same tracks on here. Premature Burial, Pit and the Pendulum, Telltale Heart, and then additional bonus tracks from something called Monster Mix, which apparently was one of those spooky sound CDs. So there's an extra of 4 or 5 tracks of sound effects of demon dogs and lunatic laughter and hungry ghouls and stuff like that. So I don't really need to buy a separate CD of that because there's enough on here, if I needed to hear those kind of boos and sound effects and things like that, that I can pick up and listen to from that CD. Another thing that I thought is very neat that came out is, and I showed mixing genres here a little bit because the previous video I did show my albums, my old record albums of some old radio shows, and that were horror oriented. And one of them was a Lights Out thing, but I also have on CD a couple different episodes of Lights Out, the old radio serial. And maybe in some cases these are more mystery than horror. But I always kind of put this in my horror pile, my audiobook horror pile, along with other things. Now, I found this CD of radio shows broadcast in 1944 and 1945, which you have to remember, people didn't have television back then. And these are 2 long stories of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is one of them from 1945 and The Werewolf from 1944. And this comes out of a company called Radio Spirits that I guess primarily issues old radio programs on CD. Not long after finding that, I actually found a 3-pack, which includes that prior CD, but 2 others too, called Classic Tales of Terror. And if you look at the cover, you can see that same one that I just showed, the werewolf is on there, the one with the werewolf story. So I basically have 2 copies of this one now, because that's in the 3-pack. But this one also has Frankenstein, as told from a radio broadcast in 1944, and another version of Frankenstein, as told in a CBS radio broadcast from 1955. So that's, much later on. But still, in 1955, not everybody had television, and so radio dramas and things like that were still big. And the third CD in that collection is a Dracula one. Must be a fairly long telling of the Dracula story, because that's the only track on here. So it's a CBS broadcast of the Dracula novel, the story, from 1938, going way, way, way back there. And that's kind of fun. I like this. What is it called? Radio Spirits, I think it's called, this company. They have a lot of old nostalgic radio programs. It's Radio Spirits is the name of the company that puts that out. Skipping around here quite a bit, and I'm also seeing some CDs that I think I left in my other room again. I hate when I do that, because I don't want to really break up the telling of the tale here. To go. Oh no, I do have it here. Okay, I'm really disorganized. Okay, well, I have more horror stories. Tales from the Tomb, which is again something. Not sure if I got that in a store. I think I ordered this online, but that's from the late '90s, and it's got a lot of original stories on here, but two fairly long Edgar Allan Poe stories again. Here's something, I don't know where I found it. I bought it online, Charleston's Tales of Terror, which turns out to be all of 21 minutes long. So I guess there's not a whole lot of Tales of Terror in Charleston. And they're not really anything really tied to Charleston, because these are stories I've heard before, but it's still fun. All told by the same guy. Like I said, a fairly short album. Interesting thing with that album is it's tied into a bus tour, apparently. There is a bus tour in South Carolina that I guess is like a spooky Halloween-ish tour of supposedly haunted sites and graveyards and things like that. And I believe the guys that ran the bus tour decided to put this together, and probably, I don't know if they have a gift shop associated with the tour or something like that. They just sold those on the tours, and they put it up on the internet. Here's something, it's a radio broadcast, but in this case, no, it's not a radio broadcast. Actually, this is rare. It's like a documentary made for audio, but made in the late 90s. So it's a bit weird, because usually at this time when you would do a documentary, it would be a television thing or a videotape thing or a DVD thing. But here's an audio documentary on the UFO crash at Roswell by Donald Schmitt. Now, I believe Donald Schmitt is a UFO expert, and specifically an expert that has looked into a lot of the details, true and untrue, of the Roswell incident. This is really fascinating, and it's done seriously. It's not meant to be a Halloween CD or anything like that. Put out by a company called the Baraka Foundation, and this one goes in and out of print too, but it's out there. Very serious. They play snippets of old interviews with people who had seen or had some kind of information about what happened at Roswell. It's really a fascinating listen. Really a fascinating listen. And, of course, because of the nature of the whole UFO thing, it ends up in my Halloween pile. Now, to me, here is my ultimate signpost of Halloween season. This is like the first stories or ghost story CD I think of every year when I think of Halloween, and it's probably my favorite one, Ghost Gallery. And again, I wouldn't say it's a lot different in terms of my description of it. It's basically a whole bunch of ghost stories, short ones. There's 13 of them on here. Some of them are based on reality and mention actors like Bela Lugosi and Hank Williams Sr. and things like that, and the fact that at some point the White House itself was thought to be haunted. Very interesting, a ton of fun. It's really one of those things that can work for adults just as well for kids, and there's not too many that do that. It's just fun. And the stories were apparently based on reality, but written by an actor and who actually even created the music on synthesizer for it, by Tom Willett. And Tom Willett has an extremely popular YouTube channel known as Feature Man. He's known as Feature Man, and he plays music on it, and he does anything from stock picks to food recipes to really humorous things. And he's got a channel at, if you watch YouTube every day, you still probably couldn't keep up with all the stuff that he puts out there. And he was a character actor for a lot of years. He retired, and I believe he is in Tennessee now, I want to say. So I guess he's retired out of show business. He doesn't act anymore. But he makes several videos a week at very least on his Feature Man channel. It's got tens of thousands of subscribers. And I even emailed him and spoke a little bit back and forth about this CD that he made. And I asked him, since no music credits are given, and there's some like minimalist synthesizer music, and I knew he's a keyboard player, I said, did you do the music too? He's like, oh yeah. So he did everything. He kind of wrote the stories or adapted them from true stories. And he wrote the music, and he told the stories and did the narration. So it's really a one-man band kind of thing, project. Next is a whole batch of CDs, and a whole batch of these stories I have actually put up like probably 2 Halloweens ago on my YouTube channel, and I'm gonna really have to try to remember to include a link for those. And the strange thing is, I didn't get these CDs in a CD store, and I didn't buy them online. It's a series of audiobooks on CD, all in little cardboard CD sleeves. That's all. And they were very inexpensive, but where I saw them, they were, I want to say, I paid about the same for all of them I know, $1.99 each, new. And so they were kind of budget things, but they were worth much more than what I paid for them, even new. Here's the first one, Midnight Shadows. Where did I find these? Well, it's by a company that I can't find almost any information on the internet, so I don't think they're around anymore. These series is called the Blue Diamond Audiobooks, and it's part of a company called PC Treasures, neither of which I could find any information about, so I'm sure these are long out of print now. But the thing is they weren't that old. This is from 2005. I think all of these were from the same year. So 2005 to me is recent history. But pretty much just about all traces of these have disappeared. Where did I find these? In one of those Halloween party stores. You know, those party stores that, Christmas time have Christmas stuff, and at Halloween time they have costumes and every kind of decorations and fog makers and sticky eyeballs and just, anything related to Halloween. And they had a couple stands. I was kind of walking around them because I love to go to these stores at Halloween. And I saw a bunch of stands that these were just kind of stuffed into. Like I said, all these very thin cardboard sleeves, but $1.99 each. And at first I thought, they were sound effects CDs, but they're not. They're audio books. And some of them run over 70 minutes each. All of these have 2 stories on them, all adapted from books. And done seriously, and these are easily amongst my favorite Halloween things. So this one has Young Goodman Brown, a story by Nathaniel Hawthorne, and The Ash Tree by M.R. James. And this is like over 70-minute CD for $1.99. So once I found, and I initially went to the store, and a store had maybe 2 or 3 different ones, and I bought them, and I went back a week or so later, and I bought every other one that I could find that I didn't already have. And I think I saw them maybe the next year, which would have been like 2006 or 7 or so. And after that, they seemed to disappear, and they didn't have them in the store anymore. Here's one called Night Terrors, and this is probably the shortest running one. It's only like 38 minutes long. But it's an Edgar Allan Poe story, The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar, not a story I'm familiar with before I heard this, and a story by a guy called Vincent O'Sullivan called When I Was Dead. So there's another audiobook CD, and I guess I must have spent $1.99 on that one too. Not all of these have the price stickers on them. Some do. Classic Tales of the Undead. This particular one I know that I did put up on my YouTube page, this particular story. And again, is that 2005? Another one, 2005. I really wish these were still out there. Story by Guy D. Musfont, The Grave, and Bram Stoker, who wrote the original Dracula, is I wouldn't say a follow-up story. Dracula's Guest. Was actually, I believe, part of the original Dracula novel that they cut because the original novel was so long. They cut this whole section out, and it became a separate kind of short story novella on its own called Dracula's Guest by Bram Stoker. So for a lot of folks, that might be the first time that you could get to hear that section of the Dracula novel that wasn't published. Here's one called Classic. $1.99 just kills me how cheap these were. Classic Tales of Terror, an H.P. Lovecraft story, The Cats of Ulthar, and The Yellow Sign by Robert Chambers. This is one of my favorites. I'm a big H.P. Lovecraft fan anyway. Man, do I love this series of CDs. I just wish there was more. Here's one called Frightful Tales, another story by M.R. James called Rats, and The Night Wire by H.F. Arnold. And The Night Wire, did I put this one up? I'm not sure I put this one up. I really like that story, though. It's about a guy working the graveyard shift at a newswire agency. So you can tell the story is fairly old, written a long time ago. And two wire service operators receive a chilling dispatch. If I didn't put that one up, I should. Horror Classics. Another one from the same company, another 2005, The Damn Thing by Ambrose Bierce, and the famous story, The Monkey's Paw by W.W. Jacobs. This is another great one. Here's one which is strange because this is the only time that I see a reference in the whole series, Scary Stories for Kids, that these are for kids, because when you listen to these, it's really just adults, not overacting, just reading the stories, and it really isn't, it's not really oriented toward kids, and maybe the reason... Well, who knows? I really don't know why they kind of put the signpost on this one, marketed this as Scary Stories for Kids, because it's just straight readings of horror tales. Robert Louis Stevenson's story, The Bottle Imp, and another Ambrose Bierce story called Stanley Fleming's Hallucination. Don't know why they shot themselves in the foot by saying it's for kids, because it's really not. I mean, there's really nothing on there that adults can't appreciate. And the last one I have, which is very long, which is like over 79 minutes long. That's as much as you could fit on a CD. Also called Classic Tales of Fear. They have the famous Edgar Allan Poe story, The Raven, which is really a long poem, essentially. And The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which takes up over 71 minutes on there. Legend of Sleepy Hollow is the only one that I'm a little blasé about. But it still will get played. And I love those, and it wasn't just for the price. To me, those would be worth 10 times what I paid for them. But I don't know, Blue Diamond Audiobooks, the company PC Treasures that owns Blue Diamond Audiobooks, I can't find any reference to them. They don't really seem to be around anymore. Here's one that I bought kind of, Classic Tales of Horror, because you can never have enough. This little cardboard case that it came in. I think I ordered this on the internet. Didn't really know what to expect. Now, the list price, which is actually printed right on the box itself, was $9.95, which is not bad when you realize, and I don't know when this is from. It's from a company in Beverly Hills, California, but there's 3 CDs in here, so it's really a bargain. Also read by such actors as Robert Forster and Juliette Mills. And again, it's got a Robert Bloch story performed by Robert Forster. And these aren't really well-known stories. These are stories that I've never heard anywhere else. And it's a hell of a bargain. It's 3 CDs full of stories that I don't have duplicated on any other horror audiobook CD thing that I have. Read by name actors. I wonder if this is still around. I'm not seeing a date on here. I want to say I probably didn't buy this until the late 90s, early 2000s. Classic Tales of Horror, edited by Martin Greenberg. 3 CDs, and the stories are unabridged, which is pretty incredible. Not knowing what this is, you know what? I have to eat my words now because I bought this, not knowing what it was, thinking it was a ghost story CD, and it's not. It's actually a sound effect. So I do have an all sound effects CD. A Night in the Haunted House, A Night in the Graveyard. So it's about 47 and a half minutes of the procession of the undead, vampires, mausoleum, entering a graveyard, entering a haunted house, the mad organist, bats in the belfry, laboratory, so all those kind of sound effects. I forgot that I had this, actually. This is not recommended for anyone of a timid disposition or children under 9, it says there. Okay. Don't know why I bought this one, too, because it says Kids Halloween, but it's got stories on it, so I had to have it. The Graveyard Dare, The Ghost with One Black Eye. You know, I haven't played this for a bit, so I think this is, pretty much oriented toward kids. When is this from? DJ's Choice. Oh, I know. I'm sure I bought this in the Halloween store. Yeah, it's one of those budget things. And to me, if it's got a ghost story on it, I'm probably going to pick it up. What else? Man, I still got a big stack here. I have to eat my words again. I do have another. I bought some of these off the internet, not knowing what they were. Here's another one, Demonic Soundscapes, which is a great cover there, from 1994. This, again, apparently is a sound effects CD. So it's The Stalker, The Werewolf Forest, The Room of Haunted Souls. I don't think I knew what this was when I ordered it, and it was probably relatively cheap for 1994, so I bought it, and it turns out, the sound effects story. I do have, because of course, the stuff that I'm trying to keep this in some kind of sensible order, but in order to do that, the stuff is always stuff on the bottom. I have a series of books. I think there's one other volume that I don't have, called Classic Chilling Tales Volume 1. These aren't actually sold as, believe it or not, Halloween stories. These are all 2 CD sets put out on the Naxos label, Naxos, who does a lot of jazz and classical music. These are not oriented towards kids. These are serious stories by M.R. James, O. Henry, Richard Kipling, Edgar Allan Poe, read by actors. An Irish actor reads all of them, an Irish actor that's done Shakespeare theater, so they have fairly serious actors' stories, and each CD is close to 80 minutes. And those are done completely seriously, and I believe there's a little bit of classical music in there for background. Here's Volume 2, read by a guy, Anthony Donovan, who's another serious UK-oriented theater actor. And again, the CDs, 2 CDs in here running almost 2.5 hours. And a lot of Edgar Allan Poe stories, Charles Dickens, Ambrose Bierce, Oscar Wilde. Again, very serious stuff. I want to say, I think there's 4 volumes. I only have 3. Maybe there are only 3. The first one I bought was cheap, and all of a sudden they just went up in price when they realized what they had, maybe. Or just Naxos in general, which started off as a budget label, got a lot of accolades for the product they put out in recent years. Their prices have gone up, so they're not as much of a budget label as they used to be. So this is Volume 3, read by Claire Anderson, another UK theater actress mainly. Once again, doing stories by Ambrose Bierce, and not always the most well-known classic ghost stories, which makes it fun because you don't know what's going to happen. I just eat that stuff up. And then I have, again, everything's on the bottom. This, which I saw in the store, which I just picked up, I think like in a Kmart or one of those Kmart, Walmart, one of those stores. And there's a DVD here of the original Night of the Living Dead black and white movie, which is in the public domain, so you can buy that anywhere for about 99 cents in a lot of cases. Not necessarily a very good print of it. But the thing that made me pick this up, though, is There's an audio CD performed by the 101 Strings Orchestra doing movie themes. Theme from The Shining, Psycho, Hellraiser, Frankenstein, The Omen, Jaws, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Halloween, which is not the original versions. Those are versions done by the 101 String Orchestra. And I have a whole series, most of these put out by the same company, I want to say, a company called Ruse, where they do Fright Flicks, a lot of horror movie themes. And these are budget CDs, not containing the original recordings, but remakes, again, from mostly horror movie themes. I Know What You Did Last Summer, Jaws theme, Halloween, Friday the 13th, the X-Files theme, Amityville Horror, a version, of course, of Tubular Bells, Mike Oldfield from The Exorcist, Psycho theme, Scream. The Scream theme is really kind of cool. Here's another one, very similar. Scream theme horrors. Again, these are remakes of the songs. Another version of Tubular Bells. I can't get enough versions of the original Tubular Bells when they remake them for these Halloween because they're always slightly different. A lot of them are done primarily on synthesizer, and it's very interesting. They don't sound as cold. They sound cold maybe, and not as rich as the original, but to me they're always interesting. It's always interesting to hear that theme done with a different instrumentation. The Shining theme, Dracula theme, Pet Sematary theme, Carrie theme, the Funeral March of the Marionette, which is a famous music piece that was adapted for the Alfred Hitchcock Presents TV show, the Lullaby from Rosemary's Baby, which is not something that you see appear in a whole lot of these. Here's one from the Drews Company, which again is a budget label that does mainly cover versions of pop songs, but this one has more orchestral stuff. Now that I think of it, I can think of one that I'm missing that I bought just last year. The Overture of Phantom of the Opera. These are more orchestra stuff, and I don't know where they got the orchestra from. I don't necessarily think it's a synthesizer doing orchestra samples. It could be, and I don't know how they would have been able to afford to get an orchestra together for a budget label like this and re-record these movie themes. Well, things that are not necessarily movie themes, actually. These, a couple of these, the Twilight Zone theme is on here, and the Dark Shadows theme from the TV show Dark Shadows, and the Psycho Suite from Psycho and Pet Sematary. But a lot of these actually harkens back to those classical music albums that are marketed as Halloween albums that have these old classical pieces that weren't really necessarily connected to Halloween when they were originally written, but were adapted so much for movies over the years and TV shows that they became associated with Halloween, like the Night on Bald Mountain, also known as the Night on Bear Mountain, In the Hall of the Mountain King, Sorcerer's Apprentice, the Bach, Toccata and Fugue in D minor, things like that are on there. And for reasons I can't really tell, it's hard to comprehend. Maybe it's because this particular CD gets played so much on the Sound of the Seasons, the cable TV channel that plays music all year long. And they have a channel that I've spoken about before called Sound of the Seasons. And, Christmas time they play Christmas music. At Halloween time, they play Halloween music. And this album is featured there every year that I've seen it. They've played a good chunk. Not as much as they used to, but I think there's at times that they play literally all 16 of the tracks from this album of Drew's Halloween horror movie themes, which everybody gives a bad rating to, but I love this album. Again, another budget remake thing done primarily on synthesizers. And yes, some of the tracks do sound a bit thin because some of the synthesizers sound a bit 80-ish, like 1980s synthesizers. But again, it's got a really kind of neat remake of the first 4 minutes or so of Tubular Bells, the Exorcist theme by Mike Oldfield. And they also do the X-Files theme, the Prince of Darkness from the John Carpenter movie, Christine from the John Carpenter movie, Halloween from the John Carpenter movie, the Scream theme, which I love, and a really kind of neat remake of Blade Runner, the Vangelis theme from the original Blade Runner. And this one sounds very close to the original Vangelis version of it, but it's a bit more electronic, sounding in a good way. It's kind of nasty and dirty, almost in a way that the original isn't quite as much, and I really like the version of it. It's also got The Exorcist 2, a particularly neat kind of track from The Exorcist 2 movie. The movie flopped, but it was a really good soundtrack by Morricone, which is, I think, the first movie soundtrack I ever actually bought. The Exorcist 2 soundtrack by Morricone, which is really cool. Friday 13th, The Shining, Nightmare on Elm Street. So no pop songs, which is kind of this company's specialty. They have a lot of Halloween-themed CDs that do, remake songs like Michael Jackson's Thriller and The Purple People Eater and all that, the sillier aspects of it. But this is my probably, and people hate this CD because they're remakes and not the originals, but I really like this. To me, this is like the Halloween music CD. It's out of print now, unfortunately. Halloween horror movie themes. I'm almost done, but no one's watching at this point, I would expect. And the last 3 items I have are all music that are not sold as Halloween CDs. They have nothing to do with Halloween CDs. But I find myself playing them at this time of year because there's a certain type of especially early, but not just early, but kind of very avant-garde, very experimental electronic music that for some reason has an ominous, maybe eerie slightly atmosphere to it, and I find myself pulling out and playing it this time of year. So there's some kind of Halloween association. This is really obscure by Christian Closier, I guess a French guy. I bought this at Tower Records for $18. This was a blind buy it just looked like something I would dig. And it's completely experimental electronic music performed completely solo, I believe, by this guy Christian Closier. And a lot of it's just, I don't know just sound effects more than music. Very cold electronic sound effects, very dark. Harmonio Mundi CD, which I didn't even realize it was. I thought it was a much more obscure label than that. Harmonia Mundi. I never knew how to pronounce that. Or Mundi. I didn't even realize it was on that label, but I've never seen another copy of this around anywhere. So I'm kind of glad I picked it up, even though it was, with tax almost like $20. Very cold, very weird. I might have, you know what? I think I put that album up on my page too, because it's out of print. I think it's up on my Cosmic Pickle page, that album. And this whole series, I just pulled this one as an example. The whole Centaur Records, which is a record label that puts out a series called the CDCM Computer Music Series. And it's all experimental electronics. What volume is this? This is only volume 2. Last I looked, they were up to volume 40-something. I would love to have all of them, but these are not that easy to come by. And it's all extremely experimental musicians that most people would not be familiar with. Richard Teitelbaum is on this particular one, and he appears on a lot of them. So he may be slightly better known simply because he did some work with guys like, I think it's Anthony Braxton in the jazz world. There's a whole series of those. I have, 8 or 10 of them, but there's 40 of them. I would love to have all 40 of them. And here's another compilation of early electronic music. This is such a great compilation. Has some of my favorite pieces on here. The Columbia Princeton Electronic Music Center, 1961 to 1973. So it's the real early days of experimental electronic music. Ingram Marshall's on here, so he's fairly well known. Charles Dodge is on here. This is the thing that drew me to buy it. I would have gotten it eventually anyway. But Earth's Magnetic Field is on here, a 14-minute excerpt of the track by Charles Dodge. Now, Earth's Magnetic Field, which is up on YouTube, is a piece you just, I don't know, it wouldn't sound, I don't think it would sound adventurous today or anything special to a lot of people, but you have to realize that, this was something that was done in 1970, I believe, or at least that's when the recording was made. And I first heard Earth's Magnetic Field when I listened to the WNYC FM, which is a non-commercial radio station in New York City, that was essentially a classical music station and a news and talk station. It used to have an overnight program that used to start at about midnight and I think go to about 6 a.m. Imagine, no commercials. And they played avant-garde jazz. It was kind of known as a classical music show, but they played some straight classical music. They played some incredibly avant-garde classical music. They played some avant-garde jazz music, just wild stuff. And I could see if somebody just happened to be up all night, like I was in the early 80s when I was during a period when I was unemployed, and I'd listen to the show all night long. And just, it was the dead still of night and these weird sounds. And the great thing is the DJ was very laid back, but they normally played the full album. So it wasn't just a track here and a track there. And one night I heard, here's Earth's Magnetic Field by Charles Dodge. They give a little bit of history, when it was recorded, whatever. And they just played the whole thing. And this is before the CD era. So you would actually hear, when the first side of an album would finish, they would turn the faders down, so you didn't hear the sound of the guy picking up the needle off of the record. They would turn the faders down, and as quickly as they could, flop the record over to side 2, put the needle down, and put the faders back up. Now that whole process took maybe 10 seconds or so, but you could actually hear it. You can still hear the needle on the end of the side 1. You can hear that like little vinyl noise coming over the radio, and then you can hear that they move the faders down, and like 10 seconds of dead air, complete dead air, or 10, 15, however long it took them to flip over the album, put the needle back down onto side 2, and move the faders back up again. And then all of a sudden, the volume comes up, and you hear that slight crackle and pop of the vinyl. And I heard that this piece, Earth's Magnetic Field, which sadly the entire thing has never become available on CD, but there's a 14-minute excerpt on here, and I had to have it as a result. And of course I got the album, and I love the whole album. This is one of easily the top of my favorite compilations of early experimental, serious electronic music. That one, and I'm fairly sure is still in print. At least I saw it on Amazon. So, I knew this was going to be long. This is way too long, much longer than I wanted it to be. So, if you're watching this, that means it came out. And if you're not, that means it didn't. But I wanted to get the second part in here, simply because I promised it, and I like to talk about my favorite and only holiday that I really celebrate. So, here we are. I hope to come back soon and be able to make more videos, the computer allowing me. I don't know. It's going to be hard for me to do these out here on my iPad. I'm just not. I don't have any kind of stand set up. And the couple times I tried the iPad, just slipped in the middle of me recording it and fell to the floor. So it's going to be hard. So that's what I got going on. Sorry for the length, guys, but it is what it is. Maybe you'll watch it in pieces, or maybe you just fall asleep when I play it. But I appreciate you being here and watching this, and I hope everybody's enjoying Halloween, at least to the extent that I am, a little bit. And I'll be back soon, and hopefully maybe I'll even do another music improvisation thing before too long, hopefully out here. Okay, guys, thanks. I'll be back soon. Tune in next time for more
Tales from the Garage.